Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. I am your host, Rocio Luna, and it is Wednesday, June 10th. And today we have a very special guest, but most importantly, we have a very important topic, which is harassment. This particular webinar will be for the state of California, although Ms. Sherelle services and her company serves nationwide. Particularly, we are going to be covering California. So, without further ado, I'm going to let her introduce herself. But I also wanted to let everybody know that if you guys have questions, comments, concerns, feel free to drop them down. There's a little comment section on LinkedIn, and there's also a comment section on YouTube. So, without further talking, I'll let Miss Sherelle introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Rocio. Thank you so much for having me today. As she mentioned, I am Sherelle Moore. I serve as the COO for Insight HR Consulting, and as she mentioned, we service every state. Right, we're all over the globe here. I myself have spent 20 years helping organizations navigate through complex HR issues. Build compliant processes and create workspaces where people feel safe, respected, and supported. And this is such a great topic because when an employee reports harassment, it is the employer's legal duty to act immediately, take it seriously, investigate promptly, and protect the employee from retaliation. So we're going to talk about that in depth today and kind of give you some steps on how to do it. So I'm excited.
Yeah, and it's a very important topic what you just mentioned about how they should record it, right? Because I think a lot of employers, especially if you're newer to the business, you don't really know what to record and how to keep record of it. So, I'll let you dive into that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because you're going to hear me say it a million times during this presentation. You're going to hear me say documentation is the key. Right. And I always like to start off by telling people, not that, because they say facts tell, but stories sell. So I might throw a little story in here every now and again. But I want to talk about first, risks. If you don't take these risks and these harassment complaints seriously, what does that look like? Right. We see legal liability. We see EEOC claims, lawsuits, costly settlements, punitive damages for failure to act. Right, just from failure to act, right? We see retaliation claims. Often those retaliation claims are more expensive than the harassment claim itself, right? And it could be triggered by a lot of different things. We see hostile work environment claims, loss of evidence if we don't act immediately, because people delete messages, people change their stories. That thing about the telephone. By the time you said it to this person, now it's gotten down, now the message has changed. Of course, it affects employee turnover. Even like high performers leave when, if they report something and nobody does anything about it. Reputation damage to the business, negative reviews. I had someone, an employer, tell me the other day about that they got like social media negativity on their site for, someone not responding and acting in a certain way. We see leadership credibility that explodes. And then it's just overall operation hassle. And my biggest thing is everything what we're talking about today is when we talk about documentation, it's also important. You train your leaders, train your staff, your supervisors, your leads. They all need to be on the same page. So how we like to start this is when you receive a complaint, you want to acknowledge that, right? The first thing is you want to listen calmly. You definitely want to use your active listening skills. I always tell people, it's like, are you listening just to respond, or are you listening to gain the knowledge, right? So the first thing is always listen without interrupting. Let them say what they need to say, whether you know something about the situation or not. Give them that space to talk to you. Always thank them for coming forward, because listen, it's not easy to report stuff. Sometimes people think that they're being, and I'm going to use like, hip terminology, like they think they're being a snitch if they say something that they see occurring, and it could not even be happening to them. It could be happening to somebody else. So you always want to stay neutral, and you don't want to take sides, or my favorite thing, don't make a promise about the outcome. right? Don't say, oh, thank you for bringing that to my attention because I know this is going to happen, right? You don't want to do that. You just want to basically clarify the what, the who, the what, the when, the where, and the witnesses. And in saying that, I want to acknowledge that you may not be the person that's going to do the investigation, but it's important that you know the steps. I'm talking about if you're the employer, you're the manager, the supervisor, us as HR representatives, we listen, we know what steps to take, right? So once you receive and you acknowledge the complaint, there are things that could go wrong in that, right? If you minimize the situation by saying to someone that told you, I felt like I felt like I'm being sexually harassed by such and such. And you go, are you sure? Because, I don't know. She or he, they don't typically act like that. Because what that does is it shuts the employee down, right? And what I've seen is later claims that the employee may have said that they felt ignored or they felt like they weren't heard. And you don't want to be biased, right? You don't want to immediately defend the accused, right? Again, like I said, oh, they would never do that because that undermines the trust. And then, of course, that can be used against you as evidence or biases. And then again, my favorite, no documentation, relying on memory. I don't know about y'all, but my memory is shot. We need to document while we're in the situation.
Yeah.
And then you want, right? Because isn't that like that's important? Because if you think about it, like now, like you just told me something that occurred. I don't take it serious. I don't write it down. I don't, and it's not always that the person's going to give you a documented note about what it is. They may just want to talk to you right then and there. And of course, the thing that some people will say is, I'm just telling you, I don't really want to take it any further. But depending, obviously, every situation should be investigated and we take everything seriously. Now, what you can do is advise them, you know what, I'm only going to talk to the people that need to be involved. I'm not going to include anybody that has nothing to do with the situation. So to me, that's ensuring immediate safety and stability to them, right?
Yeah, and I have a question because you did mention saying even though you may not be the person who's investigating it, and I want to point this out because I service a lot of middle market business owners where the business owner is the HR or they have someone who's separate, but HR is operations, payroll, and it's like, well, uh, they might be the only person who investigates it. So, in your experience, is there a proper person that should be investigating this type of situation?
Absolutely. Great question. It always should be somebody in HR or a third party, right? Because you want it to be neutral. You want it to make sure that this person can come and just gather facts. Because what I see sometimes when we do it internal and we have, maybe our supervisors or manager or owners trying to do the investigation, there could be a bias there, right? Because, I've seen investigations where a manager may have had a halo effect on an employee. They thought this employee was the cat's meow, and they didn't think that this employee could do anything wrong. So when they're asking the witness or the complainant about the situation, they've already made a decision in their mind that such and such would not do that. So it's if a third party comes in or your HR professional is there, we're seeing things from a factual standpoint. We're not having opinions. I don't have a halo of this employee. I'm just getting what the facts are. And so that's a great question.
Yeah. And just as, Gina Perez mentioned, document 100%. And Gina, you're 100% right. And then we have Mr. Chris Moss viewing us from YouTube. Great information. Hello, Mr. Moss. He's a contractor. And Mr. Moss actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I believe he was a sheriff. And when he went from, being working in the police station to owning his own construction company, he definitely dealt with several of those issues.
Good. Well, you're in the right place. So this is a topic that sometimes we know what to do. Sometimes we just need that little refresher to kind of like, oh, you know what? Yeah, that's right. I should be taking these steps. Absolutely. Well, that's good. And I think another thing to add to that is like we don't want to penalize the reporter, like, right? We don't want to make them feel like it's a punishment for that they came forward, right? So Another thing for me is obviously the next, when the yelling, you said Gina talked about documenting the complaint, write it down immediately, right? The date, the time, who reported it, what was said, witnesses, any prior related issues. And I always like to, I like to, if they're not writing down a statement, right, and I'm asking questions as I'm documenting it, even if I'm not going to be the one that's going to be doing the investigation, because sometimes I do turn it over to some of my HR consultants to kind of handle the situation. But I'll take in the notes. Like I said, I take in the date we talked on at this time, what was reported. I always repeat back what they said, because if they haven't written it down, so what you're saying is such and such said this, and I don't want to paraphrase what they said. I write down exactly what they said. Sometimes they say some derogatory comments, some derogatory names, or things like that. And I'm always about the facts, but I write it as the way they said it, right? And a lot of times we do have incident reports, or standard HR templates, but you might not always have that, right? But if you kind of follow, that guideline, you're going to kind of summarize what they said. I always like to ask them, did I miss anything? Because what could go wrong? What could go wrong, you feel like, in the documentation process? Like, obviously, vague notes, right, where you're writing about your thoughts about the employee, right? The employee was upset about the coworker, instead of instead of saying specific behaviors or dates and times of what that person said. So you don't want to come up with your own assumption. You want to make sure it's coming from what they're saying, right? And then what else could go wrong is, mixing your opinion with facts, right? Like writing, I've seen sometimes where I'll see somebody will say, oh, well, she seems very overly sensitive about the situation. No. If she said it's a sensitive situation, she advised that it was a sensitive situation, right? And again, documentation is the key. So from there, whoever is taking over the investigation, so we want to launch it a prompt investigation. It should start within the first 24 to 48 hours if possible. You don't want to wait, I'll get to this next Friday, again, because we lose, we
And then,
lose
if I
credit.
may interrupt you, because I've come
Yeah.
across a situation, um, what if the employee who is reporting this does not want, people to know? They're saying, hey, I don't want to get in trouble, anonymous. I don't feel comfortable, like, because and correct me if I'm wrong on this too, because I think when people collect witness statements, they might think that they might have to collect, a signature. So I've had situations where employees will back out saying, I don't want to get in trouble. So and so is my friend, or they're my family, and this is not going to look good on a Thanksgiving dinner. But it's wrong, and I want to report it. Like, what do you do in those type of situations?
And this occurs, that's a great question, because this happens every single day, where somebody will say, well, you know what, I was just trying to just share some information, but I don't want to be involved. What I always try to do first off is remind that employee that that the company does not tolerate any form of retaliation. And I know that saying that does not always make someone feel very comfortable. And again, it kind of goes back to, again, saying, I'm only gathering the information. I'm only going to share what I need to share. I'm not gathering this to say, oh, I'm going to go and say that Rocio told me this and that to everybody, and blast and put this person, put them in an uncomfortable scenario. But if the employee is unwilling to, give further information, get as much as you can. I mean, I typically tell them that, you're kind of mandated to kind of share, per your code of conduct, depending on the company. And if there's something we have an obligation as the employer, or as the, investigator, whoever, to gain the knowledge from you of what happened. So I just need you to give me as much information as you can, or witness, or whoever I can speak to. Right. And then maybe that's all I need from you. But I think it just kind of goes back to just reassuring them that the company doesn't tolerate retaliation, and give them examples of what retaliation looks like. Right. If you start feeling like people are treating you differently, or people aren't speaking to you, a lot of different scenarios under retaliation, then you need to report that to me, and we'll address it then. But I know it can be a scary place for employees, because some just want to, like, on the whistleblower line, they just want to just say what occurred, but they don't want to be involved in the process. Now, if it's a member of leadership, obviously, they're mandated reporters to disclose the scenario. But it can be an uphill battle trying to get someone to give information. So you just try to get as much information as you can. And again, some may not want to write anything down. They, maybe they just want to give you a little bit of information. I said, just give me what you got. Even if it's just a couple of sentences, I just have a couple of questions. Usually people they'll give you a little bit more, right? They'll if you make them feel comfortable in the situation. Now, you can't come across all like harsh, like, oh no, you're gonna tell me what's gonna happen, right? Then that can make someone be a little standoffish.
Yeah, we have a Chris. We have a question from Chris. Do they sign a confidentiality agreement by chance? Question mark. Makes everyone feel good who's reporting.
You know what? So it depends on what that looks like. Usually, like, I'll say, most employers have employee handbooks, which you should all have one. And in the handbook, it does, like, you sign a confidentiality agreement. That's mostly about the company and things like that. In terms of the investigation, I have in the past, I have had situations where I've had them sign that, this is confidential to the situation. If it has to go any further, because sometimes things may have to go further, right? I can never promise someone that I'm not going to have to take it to the next level. All I can say is I'm going to keep it confidential in the sense of to the extent of the law that I can do so. Just like any complaint or anything like that. But I will tell you that in terms of, as we look at personnel wise, because I do always get employees that ask me this one question: is this going to be a part of my personnel file? And I'm like, no, it's not a part of your personnel file that you brought a complaint, because we don't put investigations in anybody's personnel file. That's always kept in a separate confidential file, because if an employee wants to come and request their personnel file, that record should not be a part of that, because it discloses other people in that investigation, right? So I kind of go, I'll walk them through how
and that's
how
a
that
good
looks
point,
that way.
because people assume automatically, because this belongs to this employee, because people just file things away with under names, last names, and you don't really think about it. But you make a good point, because if in the future, if this employee comes back, subpoena, and they say, hey, whoa, why, Mr. Employer, why do you have this confidentiality information here? And I could totally, they'll dot it, say, yep, he was fired retaliation because he told on someone back in 2024.
And that is one of the reasons why we don't put it there. So when you're going through, you're not looking right. You can't. You're not. They're not part of that process. Exactly. So if they weren't one of the witnesses, they don't even know anything about the scenario. So that's a good thing that I like to point out to them, right?
Yeah.
To be confident, you don't share. It's on a need to know basis. If you don't need to know, there was no reason for you to have any access to that. Absolutely.
100%. We have another question here from Maria Rivera F7D. What's considered retaliation in the state of California?
Girl, everything. Okay. So retaliation can be in the form of, you change someone's, duties, right? You stop. I've had retaliation where it was so blatant that a person placed a person on a PIP for something that other people do every single day. Over monitoring, over micromanaging, discluding people from situations, from meetings. I had a manager that every Friday he got people Starbucks coffee. And because this particular young lady, she did a unfair management treatment. It wasn't even a sexual harassment claim. It was unfair treatment, because she asked for a shift change or something, and the owner gave it, and so this manager was like, well, I said no, whatever. And so he even stopped bringing coffee to her. He would bring everybody else their normal frappuccino or whatever on Friday, but he stopped giving it to her. Or it's even gossiping about somebody or sharing like, oh, don't talk to Rocio because she's the snitch. She'll tell this or that. It can retaliation comes in all different forms, and we see the easy ones, the blatant ones like I just shared, but then there could be some underhanded ones that people may know something about you, because for some reason we love to overshare about our businesses, right? Our business, our personal business. And then they may share that information. That can be retaliatory, right? Or again, I've had it where, and this is can be a challenging situation if you're the person that's accused, right? Like if you've been accused of, treating somebody differently, or if it's some form of harassment. I believe if it's sexual harassment, you're out of there anyway. But if it's some sort of unfair treatment and you're still with the organization, where you take it to the extreme, well, guess what? I'm not talking to that employee anymore. But you're the manager, so you kind of have to talk to that employee. You have to give them their metrics, all that. But nope, I'm not speaking to them, because if I speak to them, they're going to take it the wrong way. No. We have to rise above as leaders, right? So retaliation comes in all different kind of forms. But that's good question. Yes.
Yeah, it sounds like she has a more specific question. If I cut someone's hours due to lack of work, can they come back for retaliation?
Yeah, because you want to. Okay, yes. In the substance of what that situation was, why did you cut their hours? So if you're going to cut someone's hours after there's some sort of complaint or investigation, I need you to take stock of why you did that. If it was already a business need, it was already in play, then right, you should already have a documented process that was already in place. But if I just said to you, that I complained about how you treat me or whatever, that harassment or claiming whether it was sustained or not, and then the next week, all of a sudden, I used to work 7 to 4, now I'm working 5 to 2. What's the justification behind it? You should always have a justification behind why you're doing something. And if you were already in the works of making those changes, then you have no fears there, right? But I do see it. I see it a lot where people will they'll do fewer hours for somebody. They'll do less desirable assignments, put them on different assignments, or out of the blue, I get a write-up. I get a write-up for being, I actually, these things that I'm saying are things that actually have happened, where a person got a written warning for 3 occurrences of being late. Okay, doesn't that seem like normal, right? You've been late 3 times and I should have given you a documented discussion. No, but when I went back and looked at the dates were like 6 months ago. So now you're giving me a written warning. Now all of a sudden, I haven't even been late since. So right, you went back to the 12-month rolling period to find something on me to get me, right? So we definitely we want to be careful with our steps after a complaint is filed, if it's against us, right? You would definitely want to tap into your HR and say, this was something we already had in place, that way we can make sure that the message is convened to the person the right way.
Yeah, and if I may dig into that, because being late is a ongoing issue. It's always going to happen, and things happen too, right? Life happens, and there's a reason and how to appropriately do that. But nowadays, the text message is very common, right? Hey, I'm not going to show up to work, an hour before work, and like you mentioned, you have history of doing this, but you just said, like, what if this person was late, 6 months ago, and then now they're late twice in the last 2 weeks. And, if they have a rule that, hey, you can't be late more than 3 times, or you're fired. Is there a standard of how that's like measured or how to go? Because I know it's all based on, what your employee handbook says. That's why I always say you have to follow what your employee handbook says. And that's the thing that many people don't even know what their employee handbook says. But that's a different topic for a different day.
Yes. No, but that's a good way. You're right, because that does too take into part. Because here's the thing, and I always say this too when I do like these retaliation trainings and harassment free workplace and all of that. I always kind of give an example of what harassment really looks like, right? In those examples that I gave. But I also, you know, coach on saying there are some things that are not retaliatory because again, you do still as the employee still need to do your job. You still need to show up to work. You need to, be in the moment, whatever it is that you're doing. So because what I will find, I have seen this where an employee may think that they're untouchable now because I did this, this complaint. No, they still need to follow policies consistently. And if they don't, and like it's to your point of now they're late a couple more times, they come in last days ago, like they feel like with their, no one can touch me. No, you can still be touched in the sense of we can still move forward with whatever our corrective action process is, depending on what, that performance concern was. So now you're coming in late, you're absent. And if we're already on that documentation trail, we can continue on that documentation trail. That's not considered retaliation. And constructive feedback. Listen to that. Constructive feedback, not criticism, which I always hear people say, or whatever. Constructive feedback, you still need to do it because you still, as a manager, you still need to manage the team and continue moving forward. Because if you start acting differently, if it works on both sides, right? So now you're all hands off, and then the employees doing what they want to do. Now other employees see that, right? So you still want to be consistent. But again, I would always tap into your HR person because it's all in your messaging, how you follow back up with that employee, right? So, and I always like to say, let's get HR involved with this one because we did have a scenario of them complaining about this manager, right? Because then I don't want the manager to go in code-handed by themselves, not and feeling uncomfortable or not knowing what to say. So we kind of will have a scripted message that we're going to stick to for that scenario. But that's a perfect thing segue, like you said, because it could be one side where it's just blatant, and the other side is I'm just just trying to get through the day, and this employee is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and we still need to act upon your policies and your corrective action process.
Yeah. Chris says fairness and documentation is key to CYA, your business, and for your employees. Then I saw another question here from Chow M. I think he's saying, if someone is late for the first time, do I write them up or verbal?
Good question. I always say the first time, listen, we live in California. You guys know these freeways. I mean, hello, the 91 alone gives me anxiety. If it's a first offense, you give a verbal, right? But even in the verbal, I still document that verbal, right? It may not be that you're going to give the employee something, but you're going to write down, what, I spoke to Kim, Kim was late today, or 30 minutes late. Let's not be these little 5-6 minutes late. Like 30 minutes late or whatever it was, had a discussion and said, hey, notice you came in late today, whatever, just document it on your end. And then I think it depends on what your progressive discipline chart kind of looks like. Then, after I always say after like the second occurrence, then I feel it's time to do a documented discussion, right? Like, there's been a couple of incidents where you were late or you left early, and per our attendance policy, blah, blah, blah. And I like to give them a copy of that policy and have them acknowledge, right? So now when it keeps occurring, now when I go to the written warning, they can't say they didn't know because now I gave you the verbal. I kind of gave you a copy of the policy, so you're aware of it. You're aware of it well in advance. Good question.
Yeah. Then we have Mr. Wilkes started saying, great information. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining, Will. He's out. He is the safety director out in Burbank. So thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, I mean, being late, calling out of work, I deal a lot with that in both staffing and construction, especially with construction, it causes a delay. Same thing with staffing, and because the project is expecting 5 guys to show up and only 3 guys show up, and and not to pick on Gen Z or anything, but I have noticed this, complaints from my employer saying, hey, this younger generation, they don't like to talk, they don't call. I don't check my text messages. So like, if this person would have called me 30 minutes before, I would have known. And, this whole thing about text messaging. So if someone reports something through a text message, should the employer take a screenshot and save it? And should they make the other person aware of that they're doing that?
Absolutely. That's a really good thing because I actually just had that discussion this morning with an employer because, he's from an older generation and we do have to take those things into consideration, right? We're dealing with dealing with all generations in the workforce right now. And back in the day, I'm from, not to, age myself or anything, but, I'm back from a different, you had to call and there was no text messaging. There was no emailing your manager. You had to call and say, I'm coming in late or I'm not coming to work today or something. You had to get in touch. Well, we're in a different climate now, but it just depends on what the company's policies are and what that expectation is. And I know a lot of times people will say, you know what, if you know you're going to be late, you need to let me know as soon as possible. So if that method is by text message, that's fine with me. I will save the text message. I do. I save them. I screenshot it, and then I put it in the employee's file. Because on this date, this is what, this was the method that they use. Right now, that doesn't work for every organization, but I do think it's a benefit to always, and make sure you always keep all your text messages from your employees, because that can, they can try to throw you under the bus for things later. I'm just always cautious. I save that. I'll do a printout of, our conversation so that it's clear there. Because I've had sexual harassment claims through a text message, right, from someone that said something and they meant something else, but then they wrote this. And so thankfully it was all documented. So I just think it's whatever the organization's process is, and it needs to be consistent. It needs to be fair to everybody. So don't accept messages from me through a text, but not accept it from someone else. Like, oh no, in the handbook it says you got to call 955-3100. I just remember that because I worked for the county all those years ago, and that was the number that we had to call and leave a message if you were going to be late or not coming into work. So if it's that process, it should be for everybody. Make sure it's consistent.
Thank you for that, Cheryl. All right, we have a question here from Chow. If I'm laying people off, is there a standard of how I should let people know this is for a group of 10 people?
Okay. So you don't quite meet the Warren Act, right, of 60 or more. So I always think it's important to be transparent as much as you can in the business, obviously, because, you need to let people know what's going to occur with them if you can. A lot of times when you're laying somebody off, maybe are you guys considering giving severance? Maybe, sometimes I've seen where people have given stay bonuses of a week because they know they got to lay them off in June or July, but they need them to work until that time. And maybe it's a little bonus or what have you. But I think transparency is key, to have a meeting with these folks right away. Because once again, EDD, doing all of these things, looking for another opportunity, it takes time. So transparency is key, and you do want to give as much notification as you possibly can, and always consider if you can, giving some sort of severance, even if it's just a week or 2 weeks, to help that employee transition as they're transitioning out of the business.
Yeah, 100%. I'm gonna go back to that, but let me just read this comment. And update your handbook yearly to stay compliant. Yes, Chris, that's 100% true. People don't do it. And they rely, oh man, you have no idea how many cookie cutter template. And it's not necessarily their fault, because I think, sometimes people enroll in the program and they kind of give them a template. They don't really explain to them like, hey, you need to put this together and build it to an employee handbook, and they kind of go off of that. But I do want to go back to Chow's message, especially because there's so many layoffs going on, and in construction staffing, it's super common, and it's why because it's seasonal, correct? So
Right.
you know um what about the companies that just can't afford it, right? Because we have these Fortune 500 companies that, yes, you see Meta, different companies as well, who have let go of tons of people, but they have the money to do it. So what about your contractor who has 50 and less employees, and they don't have any more work booked until 2 months, so they have to let go of 15 people or so. And what it is it important to have a meeting with them to let them know that, hey, you could apply for EDD? Because I think that a lot of it goes with miscommunication, right? And it's very scary, especially if someone didn't know beforehand. They just collect a paycheck. Oh, you're out of work. Yeah, we will call you back. You're not terminated, but
Right.
you are off. And I'm seeing this a lot right now too, because on the private side, housing, apartments, the work has reduced.
Yes.
And there's a big reduction right now. And I think right now unemployment is at its highest.
Yes, right. Exactly. Exactly. You know what? So, and this is great because you're right. A lot of employers, if they're laying off, they don't have, like you said, they don't have the money to give a severance. They don't have money to give, extra pay. They're doing job shares just to keep people working as they can, changing shifts and doing all that. So I think for me, and I've dealt with a lot of companies, maybe a smaller companies that have to lay off people and there's no funds anywhere. I think if you can give as much resource as you can, and you mentioned EDD, and another a great place is to go to the workforce. I mean, as the employer, I would, or HR would go to the workforce development centers and see if you could partner with them, because you're getting ready to lay off. You're getting ready to lay off 10 to 15 people, and see what they offer. And a lot of times, because the workforce development centers, what they do is, they have jobs that are available. There's a lot of different type of programs that are under the county umbrella, whereas, getting back on your feet, rehabilitation, all of these different things, they may know jobs that are available. And if you can't offer a severance, but what I can do is offer you a resource through one of these mechanisms that can provide, maybe some guidance on, even, and I say construction because I know people that work in the construction industry, and maybe, they've always worked, they never had their resumes, right? Maybe go to provide resume writing information, how to interview, all of these different things. I just think if you offer some sort of resource, and it may not be a lot, but EDD and workforce is a good place to start, so that, yes, we don't have work for you right now, but here's a resource where you can go, and maybe there's a possibility that you can get hired through that, or something temporary, or even transfer of those skills that you have. Right, you're a plumber, but they may need this, right? And you've done that, right? Because maybe you worked as a mechanic before, you forgot that you worked with your grandfather and helped him build his 67 Chevy, right? And maybe they can utilize that transfer of skills, and that's what I've noticed through those resources.
Yeah. Chris over here commented, maybe hire from a temp agency and let them deal with that. Yeah, that is true. But with construction, they look for a skilled person, and majority of times temp agency, unless it's a construction one. But I've had situations where it doesn't really work out, just because the skill that is needed, it's less of what they're offering. But on that side too, hiring temp agencies are not cheap either. So it's
Right.
like you're going to pay up front. Yeah, you won't deal with the work. That's kind of like the leverage, right? You don't have to deal with the work comp, the unemployment. But keyword
Yes.
here too that I want to mention is that you have to be very careful on the temp agency that you hire, because there's been situations where, and the temp agency is notorious for this, where they are uninsured because they are using PEOs. So if you were to have a claim and that temp agency doesn't have workers' comp, now you carry that and that becomes your liability.
Mm. Okay.
And it's huge. I see that all the time.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting to know. Okay. Okay. Yeah, because I was going to mention too, if partnering maybe with a temp agency to see what they have available to help you to staff too on that side. That could be another resource there.
Yeah, that's why I say you have to collect certificates of insurance. If we're working with a subcontractor, this
Yeah.
goes for everybody. Collect a certificate of insurance before anybody starts any work, because I've seen it. It becomes nasty. Someone gets hurt. And all of a sudden, the partnership that you had breaks apart because now you have a lawsuit in the middle and you are responsible for it.
Mm-hmm. 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 Absolutely. See, that's all. This is all good knowledge for employers and as HR professionals. Absolutely, we need to know both sides of, or all sides, I should say, of these scenarios.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, HR is an issue, but okay, so back to harassment. There's different types of harassment, and I wanted to touch on this because that's why you have to be very careful with your words,
Yeah.
because harassment could be, obviously people think about harassment and think about all the sexual stuff. It doesn't
Yeah.
have, that's obviously that's already
That's a
crossing the line beyond it. But
yeah.
harassment could also be a supervisor yelling, using
That's
profanity. Um, Harassment also if someone doesn't feel comfortable with the words of your choice.
yes.
That's also very, it's there's different forms, and I want you to dig what is classified harassment, or what different levels of harassment.
Yeah, because like you said, harassment comes in all forms, right? It's not just the typical where we think it's just sexual harassment, right? No,
Hmm.
like you said, harassment could be, someone, making jokes, obviously making stereotypical jokes about somebody. It could be, you're excluding someone from something. It takes on a lot of different things. It's not just, it could be bullying somebody, right? Or pitting employees against each other. It takes on a lot of different things, and then we have to think about it in the sense of it's what a reasonable person deems as harassment towards them. Because, like, I have this example of this young lady. They were calling her torta, right? And so another young lady, started working there, and she said, um, why do you allow them to call you torta? She was like, well, they've called me that my whole life. I've always been chunky. Listen, I didn't even know what it was in reference to, right? But to that other person, because we never know somebody else's trauma or whatever, she was highly offended by it, even though this lady was okay with them calling her that. So when I came in to do the investigation, her thing was, you know what? I feel like this employee is allowing people to harass her and she's not doing anything about it. And so, at the end of the investigation, and obviously the lady was okay with it, but I said, you know what? We're gonna eliminate nicknames that are unprofessional, right? If your name is Vic, if your name is Val, Val Kimmer, and you want to be called Val, okay, that's a nickname. But if your name is something else, and then they're calling you, like this guy, they were calling him Chinito, and I was like, his name is Jim. Where the hell did they get Chinito from? And it's like, oh, because he's a little Chinese guy. No. That's, you don't need to call him that because he's a little Chinese guy. That's ridiculous, right? And when I asked him about it, he was uncomfortable with it, but he didn't want to seem like he was being difficult, right? So in that other scenario where the girl was being called torta, when I came back, I said, we're going to eliminate calling people out of their names. We're going to call people by their names, because that can be a form of harassment that to someone else. It takes on a lot of different a lot of different things. That's why we investigate every claim, because again, what may not, um, be important to you is important to me. Spreading gossip about people, or I just did a sexual harassment complaint the other day where the guy was telling people that he had relations with a particular employee. Now,
Oh
they
no.
did have a scenario after work. That's why I'm always like, yeah, after work scenarios can get people in trouble too. They went to a happy hour with everybody, but then they decide to stay on later and continue with the courage juice drinking. And something happened in the parking lot between them two that they both consented to. However, then that person decided to come to work and spread the news to everyone, right? And obviously humiliating the person that did not want that shared. So that's a form of it. And he didn't see it that way. He was like, oh, she consented. Da, 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 da. Yeah, but she didn't consent to you going and telling all her business, right? So that's another scenario that happens.
And let me ask you, in that situation, and it's more common than what people think. And it's a touchy topic, right? Too, because I think some employers have different stands on it. Because some employers think, oh, hey, we're all grown adults here, so whatever you do after work, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, that's your private life. You are, you do you. But if you are having, we all know you don't ever dip your company pen with company ink. Um, in that situation, is that a valid reason to terminate both employees?
Yes, it can be. It can be, because if you're an event, so now if employees are doing stuff on their own, they're going out and they're hanging out and doing their stuff on their own, okay, that that can be, it can get a little tricky there. But if we're saying, that's why you never, let me start by saying this, as a leader, you never mandate that somebody has to attend your event that's after hours, right? Because I've had, in the 30-year history of me being in HR, I've had numerous complaints about forcing somebody to go to a holiday party, or you got to be at a holiday party, mission in 7 o'clock, da, 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 and then something happens and then they sue Mr. Employer. I mean, I even had a person that passed away. They got
Oh,
drunk and passed away, and the wife sued and won because she felt that the company was forcing her husband to drink because they were passing around shots, shots, right? And the guy shouldn't have been having shots and left and got into a car accident. So if we're saying, you know what, we're going to have pizza party after work today, everybody meet at Shakey's at 4 o'clock, and everybody goes there, and then something happens, that could fall under the umbrella as for the company, right? Even though we're two consenting adults and this happened, but we were there under the representation of ABC Company, right? We were there to celebrate somebody who's retiring or what have you. We have to be really careful with those type of things because, yeah, it can come back to Mr. Employer.
I'm
That
glad you say that, because I've been in so many group chats where, it is not, nobody's at malicious ways, but they just say, everybody be there. Because, they want everybody to collaborate. See you there, everybody be there. We're handing out awards or whatever it is. But now, even me, like, I'm like, okay, you have to be very careful of what you
I,
say on
that's right.
the after hours. And, the holidays are creeping in. Everybody has holiday parties. And, that. The alcohol part is big.
It's huge, and I always caution employers on that. That's another great. I mean, we can talk about that forever. I actually I can't believe we're already 6 months into the year, but literally just 6 months ago, I was cautioning an employer because they are known. I mean, I actually saw in the CEO's office he has a whole little
Mhm,
liquor cabinet, and I
mhm,
was like, dude, I'm gonna need you to take this home. But so when they have their holiday party, they were like, we give people 2 drink tickets. Because
mhm.
so they started that because at first it was like open bar, drink as much as you want to, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, if you're going to give 2 tickets, then you as the employer, you know what you should be doing? You should be offering Uber because, and he argued me down. He said, it's just 2 drink tickets, Sherelle. I said, listen, I'm a person, I don't drink. I
Same
can
here.
get drunk off of RC cola. So if you don't know that person's tolerance, just because you said two drink tickets, they drink and they go, they leave, they left your party that you said for them to come, and you made sure they had liquor. So make sure you offer some sort of, if you drink, no driving. We'll have make sure you have a designated driver, or you sign off. And we literally put a policy in place. They signed off that if they do partake in the 2 drink tickets, that they're going to take one of the Ubers, or we have a signed person that's going to have them drive them, because these things happen, and these are things that we have to be cautious about, because the employee may not say something. Or I've seen complaints where an employee got drunk at a situation, and then they knew they weren't supposed to drink. We don't know what your doctor told you to do, and they try to sue the employer because they got alcohol poisoning.
Oh,
Oh yeah, it can get serious. So it's like you got to be careful in really in every scenario, really.
yeah. Child commented that happened many, many years ago, and the guy got a DUI.
Mm-hmm. And that's another great example. That's usually the one, and they'll come back to the employer and say, "Hey, I was drinking at your company holiday party, and I got pulled over." Yeah, and so should you be paying for that? I don't know if you should. I mean, obviously, we always get legal involved in those scenarios, but it's a thin line we walk, though. And me, if I invite someone, I was like, it's volunteer if you would like to attend. We're meeting at this place 7:00. If you want to come, please, we would love to have you, but we're not demanding that you have to come.
Wow.
And then they don't retaliate if they don't come.
Yeah, and it's networking. I'm just thinking right now, like how many networking events do we go to, and they're serving alcohol. There's no policy. There's little tickets, but like even then, that could be. I can see it being tied back to the employer, right? If it's an HR educational video, and the employer say, "Hey, you need to go get your credits," blah blah blah, and so was drinking.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. See, there's so many areas of risk. I'll tell you. And it's not that we don't want anyone to have fun and enjoy their life, but we just want you to just think about, the backlash of some of the actions that we create.
Yeah. I can't believe it's almost 11:53. See, this is what
Oh,
happens.
wow.
I love it. It's when people are interacting and having questions. And for those who are still listening, you go ahead, drop down a comment, question. And Ms. Sherelle, where can people reach out to you? Because I know there's probably tons of people here who are listening and have questions. Where can they reach out to you?
Thank you so much for saying that, because again, as I mentioned, we do all things HR. We cover all areas, investigations, trainings, maybe just employee relations, payroll. We do all of those things, compensation studies, and we can be reached. I'll give you my personal information. So here's my email. My email is smoore@insidehrconsulting.com. And I'll give you my phone number. Listen, it is what it is. 951-531-5557. See, and I've had this number for 27 years, but I like to have in all those fives. Please reach out if you'd like to discuss, some employee relations situations. If you're looking, even if you have HR, most of our clients have HR on site, but I know the capacity may not be there, or maybe there's an investigation that they don't have the capacity to do, or there's trainings. We do all of that. We're here to help you and guide you in the right way. We do a lot of networking. We do a lot of these training sessions for managers, because it's really important to make sure your manager team is trained. And then you guys know that we're talking about harassment. So harassment is every 2 years for all employers. Workplace violence is every year. So we do a lot of those trainings on a daily basis. And even just if you have new leaders, another one of our great trainings is I'm a new supervisor. Now what? Right? That's a really good one because we kind of go over all the laws. Also, another favorite of us is, our services, those employee handbooks that Rocio was mentioning, right? You definitely want to have those in place because of the litigation and all of that. You want to have your designated policies that are there. You may not need that big old thick handbook. Maybe you're just a little small company with 5 or more employees, and you just need things that are applicable to your company and what the law states that needs to happen. So we're always here to help. Again, Sherelle Moore, Moore at InsideHRConsulting.com, 951-531-5557.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I do want to highlight, the supervisor training is so important. You guys are actually the first company that came across that actually offers that. And it's so important because we rely a lot on our supervisor. Our supervisors are our ears, our eyes, the connection between us and the employees. Nobody else knows our employees more than our supervisor. And, we're really doing a disservice to them if they're not equipped on what to do. And, HR issues, they come up, they're very stressful, and you never want to, get caught up in the issue. But another, thing I want to ask you, do you help out employers, let's say, God forbid, they get into a lawsuit, do you help them out maybe like how they should prepare themselves or gather information or, like
Absolutely.
be proactive for the future?
Absolutely. And being that I'm in law school and I love all that kind of stuff. I'm like the queen of investigations. Is I actually was just last night working with a client out in Los Angeles, preparing them because they had got a PAGA lawsuit.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I was there last night late, helping them gather, the facts and putting everything together so that when they speak, for their mediation, they kind of know, what to say, what not to say, what to show, what not to show. I mean, because there's a lot of different pieces to that. Even, putting their timeline together, their summary of situations. Even like with those, I'll give an example. I have another client that I actually need to finish his workplace violence thing because he got a call from OSHA, and OSHA was like, "Where's your IIPP plan?" And he didn't
Mhm.
have one in place, right? So we had to go out and put that together for him. And then they had asked all these questions, and he was like, "Sherelle, I don't know what to say." So I just went through their trainings, made sure putting everything together in line of what they've done. So we love doing that. We love being able to help you navigate. If God forbid you have to go through that, hopefully you don't have to, but there's steps to take, and you want to make sure. So like say, even for like with EEOC claims, we do get a lot of those sort of projects because now
And
you got to do your position statement.
can you give the audience like what that means? Because I'm sure a lot
Oh,
of people see in California, but they don't know what it means.
yes. Okay. So an EEOC claim is like, what is it? EEOC employment. Gosh, now I'm getting a blank. So it's like when an employee files some sort of complaint about you. It could be a complaint about harassment, unfair management treatment, and now it's called the Civil Rights Department, right? So
Mhm.
my employer is not treating me correctly. It needs to be investigated. So immediately, what the Civil Rights Department does is they send out a statement to Mr. Employer and Mr. Employee, and they say, you know what, Sarah complained that you guys do this, and this. Tell me what's going on. Has anybody investigated this? A lot of times the employer doesn't even know that happened because the employee doesn't tell them. They go directly to the civil rights, right? To the Civil Rights Department. And then that file comes in. So then now there's a position statement that immediately you have like within 30 days to get back to them, or you can be sanctioned and fined. And let me tell you, those fines are not nothing to play with. I had an employer that had like almost like $1 million in fines. It was just
Wow.
ridiculous. Yeah, because the things kept piling up, and he never would pay attention to it. Here I am trying to sort through it and get him and write out like 4 different position statements, meaning having to speak to whoever investigations. Or maybe we haven't started the investigation, but that's our plan. But you immediately have to fill that out, get that back to the Civil Rights Department, and then they decide if it's something that they're going to pursue. Maybe I had a racial discrimination case about 4 months ago, and the manager, he was like, I don't know how it could be racial. We don't have nothing at work here but Mexican people. And I'm like, well, she was black. So right, so that her complaint was a little different, right? So when we had to go through and fill the it was, I say EEOC, I'm so used to saying that, but the Civil Rights Department said, what's your stance on this? Because the manager didn't take it seriously or anything, now that he had to hire us to come in to do the investigation for them. Thankfully, we came in, we did the investigation, we did find some stuff, but we were able to turn that over. And so the civil rights department was like, okay, you guys are handling it and handling the situation. Sometimes, but it still leaves the right for that person to sue, right? And but at least they eliminated themselves from the process. When they stay involved in the process, it can open up other things, right? Now you might get an audit from Cal OSHA, right? I feel like it puts you on the spotlight when you don't address things right away, right? So it's like, let's make sure you have an HR person that understands the laws, and understands that you have to respond in a timely manner, and jump on those things, and provide the documentation that they need. So we help with all of that.
Yeah, and most definitely. Yeah, I think, if it's okay with you, I think we should do another one with wage and hour. That's,
Yes.
the whole different topic. You mentioned PAGA. Oh, class action lawsuits. We could really go into that stuff,
Oh, we
but
can go on forever. And wage and hour, of course, is even more so than harassment claims. Wage and hour is the number one, right? We know that. Like, this is, and those fines are crazy. And even I've had employers that I know that have been jailed because of wage and hour. They're in jail. So we definitely want to touch on those.
Yeah, Chris says yes, please. Yeah, I know that the wage and hour is a hot topic. Man, you have no idea. I've been in the trenches of my employers, and they say, well, the guy got paid. We have time cards. We have ADP who tracks everything down, and all of this. Like, I really don't know where we could mess up. Like, the thing is, the attorneys want to go through it and find things, because, as you know, we don't update things and keep things in accordance. And also, if you're still using what I always tell, paper, and everything matches, this guy's been working from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. every single day, signing off his time card. You have no idea how many times that has come back, and it makes it questionable.
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, if it's not, and I know, like they said, there's no company is 100% foul proof. Like that there's not going to be any errors. But if it's we need documentation key, especially with recording people's time, all of those records. And there's a time that you have to keep those records, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it's real important that's why I said it's important that the managers know that, because if they don't know that employee has to take their lunch before the end of the 5th hour, and then there's, and they're not, those are huge lawsuits, right? Oh, I didn't know. I just had this where a manager said to me, he said, what do you mean? She takes her lunch at 7:00. And I'm like, yeah, but she's already been working 6 hours. Well, that's what she chose to do. But no, you let her choose to do that, because and you haven't paid her penalty pay for all those times, right? And now she's gone and filed a lawsuit, and you've got a process that shows she doesn't follow the law at all.
Yeah, and I've also had situations in the past where the employer says, well, she waived off her right to lunch. She didn't want to take lunch. She said that she wasn't hungry, or he wasn't hungry, and they wanted to work through it and leave earlier. Okay, yeah, but the guy still didn't take his lunch, so you're in the wrong.
You're a Mr. Employer. You're going to be the one sanctioned. Exactly. Correct. That's right. So, oh yeah, we do those trainings on a weekly basis. Those yes, because they're so essential. I'm telling you. Yes, all of this is important in running a business. And again, it doesn't matter if you have one employee or two. I've seen employers sue, but they only had 2 employees.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen businesses that had to shut down because they weren't following just the basic stuff of the law. That's why we, it's important to know what's out there. And California is an employee friendly state. I need to look in the camera and say that. Listen,
And so
employee
is New York.
friendly
And do
state.
you mind saying, going over real quick before we end this, what states? Because we do have some in my LinkedIn, we do have a couple of contractors and staffing agencies that watch from Florida. So can you quickly mention which states are pro employee?
So right now, and some states are stepping it up. So obviously, California, and then right behind California, and these are states we're all in too. California, then it goes New York, then it
Hmm.
goes Illinois, right? And I mean specifically in Chicago, right?
Okay.
And now even Texas is stepping it up
Oh,
too,
wow.
because right, I know. And Florida is a little bit more, obviously employer friendly, but now there's litigation that's out there, because I was just on the SHRM um, webinar on Monday, and they were talking about some new Florida things that are coming down the pike here by November. So Florida, there may be some changes that are coming, but those states that I mentioned are pretty much where it's really employee heavy, right?
I'm surprised Texas is
Nevada.
stepping up. A lot of people moved over to Texas for the whole point of like, hey, you don't need workers' comp, taxes and so forth. So I'm very surprised on Texas.
Oh yeah, they're starting to
Hmm.
change things. Also,
Okay.
Nevada is
Yeah.
another state. Yeah, and we have clients in all those states, and also in Georgia. Georgia's probably a more employer friendly state, but then again, they have it just depends on certain things. Like yeah, you in Florida, you can tell somebody it's at will, and you can go. This is what we think. You can say, okay, it's at will. I don't need to use at will. But I just had a case, which we're still working the case with one of our clients in Florida, where they said that, but who they said that to was a person who is a minority, has a disability, who's over 40, who also is like, what did they say, they were on the spectrum or something? I don't know. So they had all of these defining demographics that the employer didn't take into consideration, because that wasn't the reason they let them go. But it seems like they're going to win this case.
Wow.
And that's Florida. So it's important to just have somebody that understands the laws and understands the way to maneuver, do that, and make sure your managers are trained.
Yeah, well, it's absolute, delight. We went over the 1 hour, but people were enjoying it, asking questions, and yeah, a child said yes in the Legion Hour webinar, please. So I think, Mr. Ram, I will be reaching out to you because the audience wants more of you.
All right.
And wage and hour is a hot topic, man. You have
It's
to
the
prepare
hottest
yourself for
topic.
those.
It is the hottest topic out there right now, because that's and even in my legal classes, that's it. That's all we talk about. That's really how are we going to avoid these type of claims, and how do we keep people abreast of what's out there.
Awesome. All right. Well, guys, you guys asked for it. I am going to have Miss Cheryl back. I need to reach out to her to schedule a date, but it looks like, wage and hour will be the next topic. She did say give her contact information. So I'll go make sure to list it on in the comments to make sure you guys follow. Thank you so much, Chris, for staying all the way to the end. Love, we also love you too, Chris. Thank you. Cheryl, our friend Chris is actually the guy who sold. So I've had the podcast, the Triangle Hustle podcast, and he was the
Okay.
one who sold us the equipment. But a year ago, Mr. Chris had a heart attack. We thought we almost lost him, but by the miracle and grace of God, he's here. He's recovered, and he has his Batmobile, which he's been posting it. But I'm just so happy that Mr. Chris is still here. I'm just very happy for you.
Good. Well, good to meet you, Chris. I will hopefully meet you one day.
Yes. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, and then we'll stay tuned for the next one.
Thank you all.